What if I told you that Boa Hancock, the Pirate Empress, is an awakened paramecia? So, as you know, awakenings can kind of run the gambit of being just about anything. We have very similar awakenings in both Doflamingo and Katakuri, which we got a video about that coming up very soon. But then we've got sort of weird ones like Laws of Devil Fruit Awakening and Kids Devil Fruit Awakening. I've done a video about Laws Devil Fruit Awakening being very similar to what I think Whitebeard's Devil Fruit Awakening may be. And speaking about Whitebeard, let's go to Marineford. You see, when Boa Hancock uses the powers of her Love Fruit, rules kind of go like this. If a person finds Boa Hancock attractive, they are susceptible to being turned to stone via her Love beam or Marrow beam, which is a heart-shaped beam that she uses by folding her hands in a way that they look like a heart. A flash of pink hearts in the forms of light come out of her hands and the target is turned to stone. And she has a bunch of other techniques that kind of do the same thing. The odd one out is Pistol Kiss, which is a weird projection that she can do by kissing her index finger, pointing it at a target like a gun and firing. And it's said that in order to do damage, she imbues this sort of kiss projection with armament hockey, because she does this on Luffy when he arrives at Amazon Lily, and it seems to have a physical effect, which is kind of weird, but that's beside the point. Usually how one evades Boa Hancock's petrification is if they are blind or they overcome their feelings of lust for her or admiration or whatever property that is proccing susceptibility to the Love Fruit is with pain. And we see this when she first appears on a marine ship and Vice Admiral Momonga stabs his hand in order to evade being petrified by the effects of the Love Fruit. So with that being said, here's the interesting thing. Going back to Marineford, we see Boa Hancock kind of break these rules, because in chapter 560, in chapter 555, and in chapter 569, we have instances in which Boa Hancock actually turns an object into stone. This is completely abnormal for her, because so far the Devil Fruit rules have only stated that she can only affect living beings with her fruit, because only living beings feel lust. This is where I think the awakening starts to come in. The method is an attack called Perfume Fruitu. Excuse my pronunciation, but it literally translates to aromatic leg, right? What happens when she does this is that she actually petrifies Smoker's Juti, which a common misconception about Smoker's Jute is that it's completely sea stone, but that's not true. It's mostly steel and just the tip is made out of sea stone. That's why he always stabs Luffy with the tip, because that's the effective part of the weapon. So she breaks his Jute in two by petrifying it with the same attack. Then she attacks a Pacifista, cracking its head by turning it into stone. And mind you, Pacifistas are just automatons. They are just robots. We don't know if they're cyborgs, but they are non-thinking, non-feeling automatons. They can't feel lust. So her being even able to petrify one of them is interesting. And then the last example is that she randomly petrifies a pirate that's on the side of Whitebeard. But in petrifying him, she also petrifies the blade that he is holding and breaks through it along with part of his head. So with all of that being said, this is very interesting. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because this would be an awakening quite similar to Kid's Awakening, in which he can make things that aren't magnetic. And he does this in Wano against Big Mom. So it's applying by the same rules, more or less. Now, a counter argument one might bring up is that didn't S-Snake do the same thing? If you don't know, S-Snake is a clone of Boa Hancock with the same abilities, thanks to her providing her lineage factor. We know that each of the original 7 warlords that we see at the start of the story have been cloned and made into a Pacifista class called a Seraphim. And these Seraphims, like I mentioned, are clones of the original 7 warlords mixed with Lunarian DNA. And they have the ability to shoot pacifista lasers out of their hands. Don't know if they have the pyrokinesis that King had way back in the King versus Zoro fight, but yeah, that remains to be seen. We know they have the defensive capabilities when their fire is on, and they have the black wings, the dark skin, the white hair, etc., etc. So S-Snake has the ability of the Mero Mero fruit. Now you might be thinking, well, didn't S-Snake perform a very similar technique, the aromatic leg, the perfume furu? Yes, she did. However, the interesting part and the difference between her performing it and the original Boa Hancock performing it is that Boa Hancock doesn't need someone in being attracted to her in order to do it. She just does it, and whatever she makes contact with is petrified. With S-Snake, here's the difference. Number one, she didn't petrify an object. And number two, she was put in a situation in which Franky felt guilty for hurting her. Because the very interesting thing about the Love fruit in general that we find out through S-Snake is that the Love fruit's effects aren't solely connected to lust. They are connected to any sort of positive emotion that is tied to the physical being of the user. So in this situation, S-Snake uses her cuteness to her advantage. And in that cuteness, people are enamored by how cute she is or feel bad for her when they are in a position of power to hurt her. The latter is what she used as a weapon against Franky, because she was in pain after being crushed by this sea stone bubble, which then made Franky hesitate as she's like actually drumming up fake tears to make him feel guilty. Franky hesitates. She performs Perfume Furu, and that had the petrification effect on him. You see, the effect of the fruit was procced beforehand before she used the attack. Boa Hancock does not need to do this. She has done it on automatons who have no feelings toward her. She has done it on weapons, and she has done it in the process of petrifying someone who is holding a weapon. And those effects extended to the weapon. So with that being said, I'm going to say that her use of the technique is enhanced by the awakening, because now we have an example of the technique needing the extra step in order to work by a user who presumably isn't as adept at using the Devil Fruit as Boa Hancock is. Another just interesting thing is that we don't know if S-Snake can actually undo the petrification that, say, Boa would set up, because technically we find out a little more about how the Love Fruit works during Blackbeard's raid of Amazon Lily, which is also the first appearance of S-Snake. We find out that the Love Fruit is very much user tagged, in which only the user who has petrified someone can awaken them from that petrification. However, seeing as how S-Snake is a clone of Boa right down to the T, because we also find out, which was correctly predicted by me, that she also has admiration for Luffy, because Luffy is unfazed by lust or cuteness. He's a very straightforward type of person. So seeing as how those feelings are transferred into S-Snake, one can only assume that the only person in the world that presumably can undo either S-Snake or Boa Hancock's petrification is one another. They can undo each other's petrification. But another interesting thought experiment would be, could one petrify the other? Because they're both of the same quality of beauty in their respective arenas. S-Snake is very cute, whereas Boa Hancock is very beautiful. So S-Snake could have admiration for Hancock as a older, mature woman, which I assume is the same admiration that the citizens of Amazon Lily have towards Boa Hancock. Or Boa Hancock could see S-Snake as a cute little girl and reminds her of herself, which could then make Hancock susceptible to her own love beam, in a sense. So with that, that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts, though. Pauly P works here. I think Nami is a fish. Well, 1/4 fishman, to be exact. Let's talk about it. So, in One Piece, I don't think there are jokes per se, just funny explanations. One of these funny explanations comes to us in the form of a doodle. This doodle is shown to us in chapter 69. Yeah, so it's a joke within a very interesting number chapter, but I digress. Luffy draws a fish, where the group of him, Sanji, and Yosaku are discussing the nature of Nami, what she has to do with the Fishman Pirates, because this takes place during the Arlong Park arc, okay? So, Sanji fantasizes that Nami is a mermaid. Luffy has a different opinion, as his fish doodle is then depicted with hair with Nami's name written on it to reflect that she is a reverse mermaid, or in this situation, that would mean she would be a fishman. What's so interesting about this one doodle is that how persistent it is throughout the story. Because way later, during the Fishman Island arc, this doodle is a canonical character in the crowd of various fish people, I believe during the Otahime flashback. Then again, in One Piece magazine, volume 14, Luffy is depicted drawing all the current Straw Hats. What's interesting about this is that the Frankie doodle that we see back at the start of Water 7 actually gets updated to reflect his post-time skip design. However, the Nami doodle that he does in chapter 69 actually stays consistent because it looks exactly the same here in a piece of material that reflects all the changes from the post-time skip that it did in the pre-time skip. So the doodle remains the same. This is very interesting. Now, another thing that we see in Water 7 is that there are such things as 1/4 fishmen, or 1/4 mermaids in her case. I'm talking about Chimney, the granddaughter of Kokoro, who runs the train station, okay? So, we find out that she is 1/4 mermaid. And in being 1/4 mermaid, she doesn't really outwardly have any substantial fishman traits, because we've seen half fishmen before. We saw one of these guys way back in Logtown, actually. He's the guy who, I believe his name is Sappy. He sells Sanji the fish, right? So we've seen half-breeds before, but Chimney is our first 1/4 of another race. So one can surmise that as things go down the bloodline, they get further and further muddled, even though we don't see them. Kokoro does say that she had relations with a human, so her son would be a half mermaid, or just a half mer person, and then he has a daughter with another human, which is Chimney, who is 1/4 mermaid. Moving on, what's interesting about this is that I think some abilities that Nami has as a 1/4 fishman could be reflected in how she's acted in the manga so far. So her weather prediction ability could be related to her fish heritage, because we do see in Madame Charlie, Arlong's sister, and we kind of see this in Otahime, who is just very skilled with observation hockey, that premonition does sort of run deep with fish people ever so often. Also, there's the aspect of super strength that we'll get into later. But I think Nami's ability to predict the weather coincides with her fishman heritage because of the theme of prediction that we have with Madame Shirley and with Otahime. And then two, what's interesting about that is we know that certain abilities are specific to mermaids and fishmen. However, thanks to Jinbei, who is also brought up in chapter 69 for the first time, with Jinbei's ability to summon fish by calling them, we know that some abilities aren't mutually exclusive to one side of the sea-dwelling race or the other, because for the most part, that is a mermaid ability, but here's a fishman using it. Those abilities aren't exclusive. There are only two that are mutually exclusive to merfolk and fishmen. Fishmen are known to be 10 times stronger than humans, so they have the super strength, whereas mermaids, or just merfolk, are known as the faster swimmers. So merfolk have the speed underwater, where fishmen are known for super strength. So those abilities are mutually exclusive, but anything else, like sort of like prediction or premonition, really isn't. So I said to say Nami as a 1/4 fishman could be the reason why she has the ability to predict the weather. Another thing, how did her parents end up in the East Blue? Well, we know from way back in Wano that fishmen do end up anywhere and everywhere and can befall very unfortunate circumstances if left on their own, because Kawamatsu's mother was a fishman who was trying to protect her son, but she befell prejudice because the residents of the island thought she was a monster, so they did away with her and Kawamatsu was left on his own. So I say that to say the same thing could have happened potentially to Nami's mother when Belle-Mère found baby Nami and Nojiko in the conflict of Nami's birthplace, or where she was found, which was the Oika Kingdom, which is just Tokyo spelled backwards. I did not know that until I started researching this video, so that's pretty cool. But anyway, the Oika Kingdom is a kingdom in the East Blue that was attacked by pirates, and of course Belle-Mère was involved in this conflict, and that's where she found Nami and Nojiko. So, much like Kawamatsu, I think Nami's mother or father was a half fishman who bared a child with a human, and then they were living in the East Blue, but then got caught up and perhaps perished in this conflict. And that's where Nojiko found Nami, and then both of them were found by Belle-Mère. So, moving off of that, let's talk about Nami's super strength. I think Nami is a latent superhuman, and that could be from her fishman heritage. So, the reason why I bring this up is because with race mixing, some things seem to come to the surface while other things stay dormant. And we have an example of this in, say, a lot of half-breeds like Big Pan, who is part giant and part fishman. He's got slippery skin of a fishman, but is also the size of a giant. And then we have Chimney, who doesn't really display any outstanding traits at all. So with Nami, you could make the connection that she might have superhuman abilities because of her heritage. The reason why I say this is because of a very interesting turn of events that happened during Punk Hazard. We have various Straw Hats get their soul swapped by Law via the use of his Op-Op abilities. In this switcheroo, we have Sanji at one point in the body of Nami. Circumstances of the arc lead to Sanji having to perform Blue Walk in Nami's body. Now, to break things down about this, because I've heard some discrepancy about this situation over the years. Haki is connected to the soul or the will of an individual. The soul / mind / will of individuals were the things that were being swapped around via the use of the Op-Op fruit. Things such as physical strength or Devil Fruit abilities are solely tethered to the body of an individual. And we know this to be true for a variety of reasons, but the most obvious reason is Brook. In order for Brook's powers to work, he had to find his original body as a soul while wandering the Florane Triangle. So the Devil Fruit contract was not shown as a success until his soul found his body. Therefore, he is tethered to his body. We see this too during the post-time skip when he does astral project. The weird little ghost is still connected to his body. It's not so much an anchor because he seems to be able to move freely for an undeterminate distance, but he is still connected to his body. With that being said, Nami being able to perform Blue Walk shows that she has a degree of super strength. And we know Blue Walk is specifically super strength based because it's just an underwater variant of Moonwalk or Geppo, which is a CP9 technique, one of these 6 powers. And in chapter 348, it is explained that with the strength in the CP9 members' legs, they are so strong that they can push off of cushions of air to stay afloat. So this is solely a superhuman feat. Much like the majority of the six powers, honestly, the only one that's not related to super strength is paper arts, which is the one when you're moving and dodging like paper. So this is Nami's body performing a superhuman feat by using a technique that requires super strength. What's so interesting too about this technique in particular is that when Sanji first performs it during the start of Fishman Island, it is compared to the swimming speed of a fishman by Usopp and Chopper. So we have Nami performing a superhuman feat to obtain the swimming speed of a fishman. Seems a bit too coincidental, even if it's Sanji doing it in Nami's body. Nami's body was also able to deliver a kick strong enough to force a shark to release Kinemon's body part. So that's another very interesting feat of some super strength there. Now, in terms of narrative, this creates something very interesting for Nami and Arlong. This means that potentially Arlong enslaved a fishman to meet his own goals and devices, not unlike how humans have fishmen and human slaves to serve them. So he is no better than the people that he despises, which is really interesting. And then you have the line about him thinking Nami is a human, but better than most humans because of all the wealth that he can potentially make off of her, which again is kind of funny because in this situation, she would be a sister to him, in a sense, a sister in like race relations. So it all boils down to Arlong being extraordinarily ignorant on an entirely different level. Also, you can say too that he ends up branding a child with a mark of servitude, because even though the Arlong pirate symbol is sort of like a symbol to show that you're part of the group, in Nami's situation, it was to be a mark of servitude. Kind of like how a sun tattoo is supposed to be an inversion of the celestial dragon mark, which it is not lost on me that this too would make Nami the complete inverse of Koala, because while she shows off her redesigned mark of slavery into a mark of strength, being the pinwheel and the orange to represent her father and mother, also with her being a fishman, even though she's 1/4 fishman, a fishman nonetheless, enslaved by other fishmen, but for the most part raised by humans. Koala, a former slave of humans, then raised by fishmen for the most part, because she was brought up by the Sun Pirates a little bit, and then spent some time with her mother, and then was taught fishman karate, most likely by Hack when she joined the Revolutionary Army at some point. She hides her sun branding, even though the Sun Pirates branding is a positive symbol. It's not a symbol of slavery, it's a symbol of freedom. So it's weird that one hid a symbol of slavery to turn it into a symbol of freedom, but then one hides a symbol of freedom that was once a symbol of slavery. So I find that very interesting between Nami and Koala in the narrative. To put another narrative spin on things, I think it's very interesting just how involved Nami and Sanji have been in each other's storylines, much like how Sanji was the one to surmise what Nami's relation is to the fishmen by mentally depicting her as a mermaid, or how Nami pointed out how weird it was that Sanji was from the North Blue, which later comes to a head in Whole Cake Island, of which she was a big part of. So much just like how Sanji's latent durability and super strength were awakened by the raid suit, I think it's going to come to a head just how weird Nami is and how her latent super strength has been awakened by her adventures on the seas, how her fisherman heritage has eventually come to a head, because now nobody knows Nami better than Sanji, as he spent some time in her body thanks to the powers of the Op-Op fruit. But with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts. If you like stuff like this, please feel free to check out my YouTube channel, Pauly Works. And if you like what you see, I would appreciate your subscription. Thank you so much. See you next time. So I was talking to a member of my Discord, the Digital Burrow, Mr. Bushido, and he came up with a very interesting idea. What if Nami ate a monkey Zoan devil fruit? Now, while I disagree with Nami being the eater of said fruit, this proposes a very interesting question. How far are the Sun Wukong parallels going to go with Nami? Because, of course, she has an extendable staff in the Climax, which is made even more obvious due to the upgrades she's gotten after Zoe. And then, of course, now she has Zeus, who now possesses the Climax. So, here's what I'm thinking. 2 points. But to sort of bind the 2 points together, I'll preface the statement with this. In One Piece so far, with devil fruits other than, say, Logia fruits, because Logia fruits are a whole nother kettle of fish, but with Zoan and Paramecia fruits, there seems to be a need to put them in unique situations. We've just had that a bit in Egghead with the brain fruit, and it's occurred several times with Zoan fruits across the series. So, here is my idea, or at least one of two of them. One, a monkey fruit is given to Zeus. Therefore, in cloud form, perhaps he will become solidified in a way, therefore allowing Nami to ride on him, because based on the weird reality warping aspects of devil fruits, he could still be a cloud while being solid, therefore being lighter than air, yet not being lighter than air, which will allow Nami to stand on him. This would also be a unique situation because now we have a devil fruit construct eating a devil fruit. However, based on how the devil fruit construct was created, it in itself, meaning Zeus, is his own independent entity. Okay, but to present another idea, an idea that I've talked about before, if Zeus is done and we aren't going to focus on him anymore, I still think it's very possible in the future that either Nami gets Pandora, which was the tiny sun created by Mother Caramel when she had the Soul fruit, or she gets Prometheus, if Prometheus is abandoned by Big Mom. If she gets either one of these homies, I think one of these homies, which are both sons, are more reliable candidates or more interesting candidates to eat a monkey Zoan fruit. Therefore, much like the Captain Monkey D. Luffy, who is the user of the Sun Deity fruit, the human fruit model Nika, you would have a reverse on that play, in which a sun, meaning either Pandora or Prometheus, has eaten a monkey Zoan fruit. Therefore, they are a sun monkey, much like Luffy is in an odd way. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Pauly Works. So a while ago, I did a video discussing how Perona's ghosts wouldn't work on certain characters like they don't work on Usopp because these characters are already very depressed as it is. Here are some more characters that the fruit wouldn't only not work on, but have very interesting interactions with the fruit. The first one being Nico Robin. Robin has a gag in which she already points out how morbid things can get, so most likely she wouldn't be affected by the powers of the Hollow fruit, which is a shame because technically the Hollow fruit is the arch enemy of the flower fruit, because the powers of the flower fruit allow you to bloom any body part on any surface, right? And anything that happens to said body part is transferred to the main body. This goes for devil fruit effects as well, because in Dressrosa, we see when Robin is attacking Sugar, Sugar gets a hand free and manages to touch one of Robin's limbs. The effect of the Hobby fruit belonging to Sugar then is transferred from the limb sprouted on her to the main body of Robin, and therefore Robin becomes a toy. The same thing would most likely happen with the hollow fruit. If the hollow fruit went through one of Robin's limbs that she's grown on an individual or on a surface, nothing would happen because Robin apparently or presumably is already always depressed or has a dark personality. The other person of which whom this wouldn't work on would be Brooke, the person that Piranha shares an arc with, because Brooke has had everything taken away from him. So life can't get much worse than what it already is for him. And he tries to see the bright side of things. Therefore, I don't think after seeing the depths of horror can one be felled by some funny ghosts passing through them. Another thing that's an interesting thing to consider is that if Piranha does join Crossskill, the Straw Hats and Crossskill would both have very ghostly people on their side, because what's funny about Brooke is that he basically turns into Piranha post time skip thanks to the elevated powers of the revive fruit, because he too can become a ghost. Though unlike Piranha, he can't summon like a variety of apparitions to his aid to do his bidding. He can only astral project his soul out of his skeletal body, and then that soul can actually cause cryokinetic effects when it passes through a living body. This is very similar to the ability that Piranha's ghosts have. Oddly, when Piranha astral projects herself, she cannot do the same things that her ghosts can do, apparently. Even though this was done on Usopp, so she may have this ability now, because she seems to be more powerful now in the post-time skip as opposed to the pre-time skip. But from what we have seen, the astral projected version of herself does not have the same effects as the ghosts that she generates. So that's interesting, but it's also very interesting that we now have potentially two ghostly people on two Yonko crews who have similar abilities. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Paula P. Works. There are rumors going around that Silvers Rayleigh has a child, and that child is Dracula Mihawk. I don't think this is the case, because in chapter 1059 and in episode 1088, we see that after the attack on Amazon Lily, Boa Hancock is resting her head on Rayleigh's lap. She has not done this to another male in the entirety of the series, not even Luffy. So, why does this make sense? It makes sense because that is her father. Also, we know that Conqueror's Haki is hereditary because Yamato and Ace have displayed Conqueror's Haki because of their respective fathers, most likely. And Boa Hancock, too, has Conqueror's Haki. She's the first person in the series to have all three types of Haki, in fact. So, who would she get that from? Her father, who is a legendary pirate, who is Silvers Rayleigh. Give me your thoughts. Okay, so mirror piece time. All right, so in the mirror, we see two angelic figures, but we're going to focus on the black one because that one's most likely a Lunarian. So, I don't know if I'm going to take that stick figure seriously, but if we were to take it seriously, right? If we were to take that one for how it looks right now, out of all the Lunarian characters that we have, the only one who is wearing a dress or a long shirt or what have you is S-Snake. I could believe S-Snake is probably going to be the most important because she got a lot of coverage during the Egghead arc. So I could see if there was ever a Seraphim to defect and be on the team of Nika to be on Luffy's team, I could see it being S-Snake because it parallels very nicely with Hancock because she was the first one to be smitten with Luffy anyway. And then, of course, then we have Jinbei, who became a Straw Hat. So, if there ever had to be a Lunarian that was on Luffy's side, I would think it would be S-Snake. Now, Do I think all the Seraphim are going to age up? I think that is an inevitability because it doesn't make sense necessarily to keep them as children. I think the battle data that they are collecting is going to shape and mold them and turn them into different characters from their warlord counterparts. S Snake could be mostly unchanged from Boa Hancock, but at the same time, that seems kind of superfluous. I don't get the point of having the same character be done twice with the same gag. So I could see her still being infatuated with Luffy, but maybe over time, it's not so much of a schoolgirl crush that then develops in a romantic obsession, but maybe she sees him as a father figure or something like that and will do anything for him out of loyalty because of the impression that he gave her when she was a child. Now, I don't know how these guys will be aged up. The obvious answer is Bonnie, but for that, we'll have to wait and see because of how just weirdly things are going. There could be another fruit that can age people up. And I think we've seen that already. Okay, so if you recall, in the owl library, there's this giant Albathian owl that has the ability to make things bigger. So I think perhaps in accordance with him being a fun reference to the more fruit that the non-canon character Burndy World has, perhaps, just perhaps, this fruit, which is called the Grow fruit, held by Biblo, perhaps that fruit can actually age characters up or age biological organisms up. That's the play, I think, because he's called a nurturing owl and it means to raise up. So I would only think an Iku, because the fruit's called the Iku no Mi, which means rearing, nurture, cultivation, and that could mean of children, of animals, of plants. So how else do you raise children but to help them to grow? So if there was ever an alternative to making the Seraphim become older, I could see it being this owl. I don't know if any of them are coming to Elbaf as backup for the two Holy Knights that are there already, but it is something to think about. So to wrap everything up, I could see the Lunarian depicted in the mural ending up being S Snake. I also think that a lot of the Seraphim aren't going to keep their code names as their normal names. They're going to get other names. That just doesn't seem like Oda to have these actual growing characters be marked down as machines when they're clearly not. For example, Kuma's name isn't PX0, it's Bartholomew Kuma. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What's it?
So I just noticed this, and this is very funny. Okay, you remember when Hancock throws Glorissa out of the palace during the Amazon Lily arc? You know what that reminds me of? And I gotta wonder if Oda saw this and copied it because of his love of Disney stuff. What if that's a reference to the Emperor's New Groove, like towards the start, where Cusco has the old guy thrown out the window of his palace? They're so similar that it makes me think that's where Oda got it from. Because if so, that's very funny and very good, and it gives Hancock a lot of personality. But of course, Glorissa falls on her feet because she is a former Rocks pirate and a former Empress. But I just thought that was really funny, and I thought I'd share it with you all. But give me your thoughts.
Big shout out to commenter Dale Duran on my video about Perona being a great navigator, because they do point out something very interesting that was contested for a long time. But Perona does get an upgrade from the post-time skip that she could not do in the pre-time skip, suggesting that she does get a significant amount of Devil Fruit development over that time period. and that is she can now fly in her corporeal form, which she could not do previously in the pre-time skip. In order to fly as if she were a ghost, she would need to obtain an incorporeal form by astral projecting her spirit, I suppose, out of her main body. This then allowed her to fly around and pass through walls. However, in the post-time skip, she can just do that normally. We don't know if she could pass through walls in her corporeal state, but she can at least fly. Why this is so interesting too is that this is the exact opposite of what Brook's upgrade is in the post-time skip, because during the course of the time skip, Brook discovers while he's on tour that he can astral project using the powers of the revive fruit. However, where this differs from Perona is that unlike Perona, he can actually affect the living beings that he passes through, freezing them in the process, whereas Perona, she couldn't do anything. So that in itself is very interesting. Another interesting thing is that when Brook astral projects, the projection that he emits is that of a little green ghost, which differs from Perona because Perona has her full body on display when she used to astral project. Brook's is significantly different. And much like Perona, he can pass through walls as well. I do find it interesting seeing as how we're introducing them at the same time in Thriller Bark, but it's very funny how they've developed on a similar stream, despite having two totally different Devil Fruits. But that's just something that was pointed out by the commenter, and that's something that I thought of too, thanks to their comment. So big shout out to them. But with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and tell your friends about Polypede Works It. So there are a few miscellaneous characters I missed in the Viricard breakdown. I just wanted to talk about them. So we have Yamasan, whom is the giant white pig who is regarded as the mountain deity, the one that Odin sliced in half but was later stitched together. Yeah, him. We have him. Then we have the baby known as Koyama, and he is the little baby of the pig. And then we have a very weird one, Norinsuke, who is actually a shaman who turns out to be Hold'em's father. Hold'em was the guy who got the weird lion smile fruit that cursed him to have a fire-breathing lion in his gut. So that's weird. I did not know he would even have a dad, but they have the same eyes. So it makes a lot of sense. But getting back to the pig, Yamasan, you know what's really interesting? Just thinking about white animals and devil fruits and such. We know that Yamato has a fruit that turns her into a white wolf, but there is no devil fruit currently that allows someone to become a pig or a boar or something like that. That's really weird when you think about it, isn't it? Because there's no pig fruit, there's no boar fruit outside of Warcree's supposed ability I could mention, because he does turn into a pig, but the jury is still out on whether that is a devil fruit power or not. Occam's razor would suggest that it is, because he has all the characteristics and calling cards of a Zoan, so it's very likely that he is a mythical pig Zoan. But to continue, and I wonder if there was a devil fruit that is reminiscent of this particular pig, would it be an ancient Zoan? Seeing as how they regard Yamasan, this giant white pig, as some sort of deity. That's something to think about, because why is it called a deity? And then for it to be stitched back together, I think does speak to Odin's sword skill, because it was a clean cut, but it's still kind of weird that that happened. So I wonder if there's any myth or legend about this pig that would constitute it being turned into a mythical Zoan fruit. I don't know, that's something to think about. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Works It. So this is something I remembered while doing my video on the early concepts of Luffy. I remembered that The early concept of Nami had a sort of mechanical hand, right? And she was holding an axe. Well, in Skypiea, and a few people online have brought this up, in Skypiea, when Nami is wearing Gonfal's gauntlet that has one of the dials in it, that's a reference to the old concept of Nami holding the axe, because as she's holding the axe, it looks like she has a mechanical hand or she's wearing a gauntlet. So that's a really cool callback that happened in the canon that I forgot about entirely. That's really neat. And I wonder if Nami will ever actually come full circle and get an axe in the future. But give me your thoughts. Are you familiar with the character Morgan Ainsland? Morgan Ainsland is a succubus from the video game series known as Darkstalkers by Capcom. She is attributed to being the origin point for Japan's fascination with succubi as she popularized the concept. Even though she wasn't the first, she is the most popular. With that being said, you see many succubi in various Japanese media, and I think you're going to see it in One Piece, and the characters that you see on the Straw Hat crew in One Piece are going to very well match how Morgan is presented in Darkstalkers. Because the funny thing about Morgan is that she has a clone slash daughter slash lost piece of her soul called Lilith. So in Darkstalkers, there are two succubi. One is named Lilith and one is named Morgan, with Lilith being the clone. How this comes back into One Piece is that I think Stussy is going to join the crew alongside Robin. These characters are very similar in a lot of ways because I think they play upon the ideal of the practical and the literal versus the figurative and the fanciful that we've seen in various members before. For example, Franky, like Stussy, was an antagonist. But Franky in his relationship with Luffy is very similar because one, they both wear red. Franky just has a more fanciful version of what Luffy wears. And two, everything Luffy does is named after a weapon, but there is no weapon present. He is punching most of the time, right? So when it comes to Franky, he literally has those weapons within his body. Everything he does is actually real. Also, Luffy is able to inflate his body and has a move called Tank Man when he achieves Gear 4th, right? Well, Franky also inflates and he actually turns into a tank of sorts. But there's a practical reason behind both of those abilities. They're both done through engineering, whereas Luffy's abilities are done due to the powers of his devil fruit. So on one side, you have a practical character who then copies the abilities of the impractical character. And then two, Luffy is known for stretching out his arms, and Franky can stretch out his arm as well. But while Luffy stretches out his arms due to being made of rubber due to the powers of his devil fruit, Franky stretches out his arm because it is an engineered part of his body. It is a fist attached to a chain that is built into the base of his forearm. So that is the practical versus the fanciful, the literal versus the figurative. With Robin and Stussy, you have a very similar relationship because while Stussy is a clone of Buckingham Stussy, much like how Lilith is a clone of Morgan, Robin's ability is to figuratively make clones of her body parts and herself. These are not real constructs as they have a direct line to her when they are damaged. She is damaged and they can be spawned and whisked away with a thought, whereas Stussy literally is her own being and her own person. Continuing with that, due to the powers of the Bat fruit, you could say Stussy literally is a succubus and does succubus-like things, as she does train the life force of both two men, Kaku and Lucci. However, Robin is a figurative succubus because she takes the visions of a succubus during her fight with Black Maria, in which she uses her flower fruit powers to take the form of a succubus, and she is figuratively the holder of the epithet demon child. But she is neither a demon nor a child at this point in the story. So that is what I'm saying. You have the literal succubus in Stussy versus the figurative succubus in Robin. So much like in Darkstalkers, I think on the Straw Hat Crew, you will have these two women present, both being succubi, but one being a figurative succubus and the other one being a literal succubus. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What? Are you familiar with the character Morgan Ainsland? Morgan Ainsland is a succubus from the video game series known as Darkstalkers by Capcom. She is attributed to being the origin point for Japan's fascination with succubi as she popularized the concept. Even though she wasn't the first, she is the most popular. With that being said, you see many succubi in various Japanese media, and I think you're going to see it in One Piece, and the characters that you see on the Straw Hat Crew in One Piece are going to very well match how Morgan is presented in Darkstalkers. Because the funny thing about Morgan is that she has a clone slash daughter slash lost piece of her soul called Lilith. So in Darkstalkers, there are two succubi. One is named Lilith and one is named Morgan, with Lilith being the clone. How this comes back into One Piece is that I think Stussy is going to join the crew alongside Robin. These characters are very similar in a lot of ways because I think they play upon the ideal of the practical and the literal versus the figurative and the fanciful that we've seen in various members before. For example, Franky, like Stussy, was an antagonist. But Franky in his relationship with Luffy is very similar because one, they both wear red. Franky just has a more fanciful version of what Luffy wears. And two, everything Luffy does is named after a weapon, but there's no weapon present. He is punching most of the time, right? So when it comes to Franky, he literally has those weapons within his body. Everything he does is actually real. Also, Luffy is able to inflate his body and has a move called Tank Man when he achieves Gear 4th, right? Well, Franky also inflates and he actually turns into a tank of sorts. But there's a practical reason behind both of those abilities. They're both done through engineering, whereas Luffy's abilities are done due to the powers of his Devil Fruit. So on one side, you have a practical character who then copies the abilities of the impractical character. And then two, Luffy is known for stretching out his arms, and Franky can stretch out his arm as well. But while Luffy stretches out his arms due to being made of rubber due to the powers of his Devil Fruit, Franky stretches out his arm because it is an engineered part of his body. It is a fist attached to a chain that is built into the base of his forearm. So that is the practical versus the fanciful, the literal versus the figurative. With Robin and Stussy, you have a very similar relationship because while Stussy is a clone of Buckingham Stussy, much like how Lilith is a clone of Morgan, Robin's ability is to figuratively make clones of her body parts and herself. These are not real constructs as they have a direct line to her. When they are damaged, she is damaged, and they can be spawned and whisked away with a thought. Whereas Stussy literally is her own being and her own person. Continuing with that, due to the powers of the Bat Fruit, you could say Stussy literally is a succubus and does succubus-like things, as she does train the life force of both two men, Kaku and Lucci. However, Robin is a figurative succubus because she takes the visions of a succubus during her fight with Black Maria, in which she uses her flower fruit powers to take the form of a succubus. And she is figuratively the holder of the epithet demon child. but she is neither a demon nor a child at this point in the story. So that is what I'm saying. You have the literal succubus in Stussy versus the figurative succubus in Robin. So much like in Darkstalkers, I think on the Straw Hat Crew, you will have these two women present, both being succubi, but one being a figurative succubus and the other one being a literal succubus. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?
I just had a very funny thought. If Moria tried to extract Alvida's shadow from her, if, say, the shadow inherits the properties of the user's body, that means that Alvida's shadow would simply slip through Moria's hands because of the power of the slip fruit. Nor could he cut Alvida's shadow because Alvida too is immune to blades. This is a very funny thought because I can imagine Moria trying to grab Alvida's shadow as if it were a bar of slippery soap falling through his hands, and trying to cut her shadow would also result in the same sort of mishaps. So I find that very funny, but give me your thoughts.
All right, so I've done a ton, and I mean a ton of videos about Nami getting a son homie at some point to go with her whole theme of weather, seeing as how she has Zeus as a companion now, and Zeus was originally a cloud homie, though things are a little different now as he's technically the Climatek itself, right? But he still takes the form of a cloud ever so often. With that being said, I thought about things and I came to the conclusion of, well, if this son homie, whether it be Pandora, which was the homie made by Mother Caramel, or Prometheus, which is the son homie in the current possession of Big Mom, if either of them were to go with Nami, would they possess some equipment? I believe in the past, I was stuck on the Climatek still being the center of the conversation. However, the more I thought about it, the more I started to think, well, what other important equipment does Nami have? Currently, she has the Climatek, but she also has the log pose that she wears on her arm most of the time. So possibly, maybe, this son homie could possess the log pose, because there is something called celestial navigation, which is a real world thing in which you can use celestial bodies like the sun in order to figure out where you're going when you are sailing. So in this situation, maybe like how it was powered up in Fishman Island, technically, maybe this will be the next step for a power up when talking about the log pose, because I liken the log pose as One Piece's version of the Dragon Radar that you see in Dragon Ball, because both of them are kind of compasses that are used as a tool in a big treasure hunt. One Piece's log pose connects you from island to island based on each island's unique magnetic pull, and then that takes you to the final island, Laugh-Tale, where One Piece is supposedly is, and then the various versions of the Dragon Radar pick up on the various Dragon Balls throughout the series. With that being said, I think seeing as how we have one version of the log pose for the majority of the story, then that log pose gets upgraded in Fishman Island, I think it's possible that the log pose could be upgraded again via a homie later. Possibly here in Elbaf, seeing as how homies themselves technically have some relation to Elbaf, seeing as how Mother Caramel is related to Elbaf, and then Big Mom is related to Elbaf, and then Big Mom got her powers in Elbaf when she ate Mother Caramel. So that's just to say that it's very possible that that upgrade could happen here. It's also very interesting too that currently Nami doesn't have her log post on her, so we don't know where it is currently. So that's another interesting tidbit that I just wanted to add. On top of that, if a homie does possess the log post, whether that be Pandora or Prometheus, I think maybe it will be possible for the homie to inform Nami on what exactly is ahead based on what island they choose to go to, based on the three outputs that the New World log post puts out. So maybe the Sun homie can give us a more detailed description or tell us just how dangerous the island ahead is. Maybe. I'm just spitballing some ideas for that, but I think in some way adding a homie to the log post will make the log post more efficient somehow. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What's it?